From the moment we wake up, we're bombarded. It's hard to say exactly when it happened, or even how, but at some point, not long ago, misinformation became mainstream.
The claims were debunked several years ago.
Conspiracy theories crawled out of the dark corners of the internet and began shaping world events. The US Capitol riots, vaccine mandate protests, even the war in Ukraine, all driven by disinformation.
There is a common thread between them, and that's that the information environment has become toxified. You can't sustain a society if people can't agree on basic facts.
Imran Ahmed runs a non-profit called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. He and his team find and fight online misinformation and hate speech from their offices here in Washington, D.C.
Hey, Cal, how you doing?
I'm all right, yeah, not too bad.
And here in London, UK.
Can we go through a few things that we've been working on?
They recently examined 1,300 Facebook posts from Russian state media and found, despite its previous pledge, that Facebook had failed to label 91%.
Now, their initial reaction was actually to deny our research,
including this one, promoting the conspiracy theory that the United States is secretly funding biological weapons labs in Ukraine.
Facebook said it would put these labels on there.
The baseless claim first took off on Twitter.
If you were hearing about the biolabs, it was me.
Before being picked up by Russian and Chinese officials, followed by Fox News.
What exactly are they doing in these secret Ukrainian biolabs?
The labs aren't a secret. The international community openly funds research labs in Ukraine and other countries to protect against infectious diseases. But that didn't stop Russia from spreading the lie.
Putin has invaded a sovereign country, and the first weapons he used in that war against Ukraine were not missiles or tanks. It was disinformation and lies spread through propaganda on social media.
And Imran knows firsthand how disinformation and lies can be deadly. Back in 2016, he worked in London for the British opposition Labour Party.
Boris, you should know better.
The months leading up to the Brexit referendum were littered with false, racist claims about migrants and refugees. One of Imran's closest colleagues, Labour MP Jo Cox,
and there's growing evidence, as we know,
was campaigning against Brexit when she was shot and stabbed to death in the street. Witnesses say her murderer shouted, "Britain first."
I saw him pulling the gun out.
In the days before, he'd accessed a long list of white supremacist websites and social media posts.
I mean, I was one of the first people to hear the news because I was in head office at the time, and I cried. It is the misinformation that underpins the certainty they have, such certainty that he's willing to murder a mother of two to achieve his ends. There is no question anymore that online hate and disinformation have a real world impact. And that question is settled. The question now is, what do we do about it?
Imran's answer is this.
There is an active failure to act.
Soon after Cox's death, he left British politics and launched his organization,
the Center for Countering Digital Hate,
calling on social media companies.
We have the right to have information that isn't being sullied deliberately.
It doesn't matter if it's true or not.
To crack down on misinformation and hate on their platforms.
What they're doing is trying to overwhelm our defenses.
At the time, 6 years ago, when I was telling everyone, look, this is being inculcated on Facebook, people laughed. People said, Facebook, that's where I see what my grandkids are doing. And of course, people didn't get it. People would say to me, but it's the internet, it's not the real world. No one's asking me anymore, is there a real world cost for online hate and misinformation?
The 6 years since Jo Cox was killed have witnessed an explosion of extremism.
Then people keep saying it's un-Canadian. People keep saying these are things that are happening in America, un-American. I keep saying that Brexit was kind of un-British. We're a very moderate people, and yet these extreme things are happening. But they are becoming perfectly Canadian, American, and British because that's the world that we now live in.
And if a user engages with misinformation on social media, they're likely to be fed more, creating a convergence of conspiracies.
If you like anti-vax, it will feed you QAnon and anti-Semitism. And vice versa. If you like anti-Semitism, it will drive you COVID disinformation and vaccine disinformation. So you see this deepening and broadening of extremisms. That's how they design their platforms. They're delighted, is the truth. Because if people are consuming more and more conspiracy theories, they don't go to the library for it, they stay on platform.
And the longer a user stays on platform, the more ads they see, the more money that platform makes. An addictive loop of disinformation and hate that once consumed Lauren Manning.
Look at that look. Now there's the look.
There's one to use.
There's the look.
Growing up in a mostly white, middle-class suburb near Toronto, Lauren never felt like she fit in. When she was 16, her dad died from cancer. She felt angry and alone.
I was close to him, so I was looking for someone or something to attach myself to.
The following year, in 2007, she was posting on the Facebook page of her favorite heavy metal band when she received a message from a stranger.
He was fairly careful around me. He wasn't dropping racial slurs right away. So eventually the narrative that he had given me was, well, okay, you know all the people at your school that you don't like? How you talk about them being elitist? You should meet some Jews. You should see how elitist they are.
Before long, Lauren was a full, tattooed member of a white supremacist group. 1488 stands for white power and Heil Hitler. She attended meetings and got into fights.
It was a very painful time for our family. You know, when you blame yourself as a parent, you take on a lot of guilt.
Her mother, Jeanette, eventually gave her daughter an ultimatum. Choose her family or her hate group.
I was heartbroken when she chose them and she left, and I just sat and I cried.
But after a while, she began to question the group's claims. One of her friends was stabbed to death in an unrelated attack, but the group lied and claimed he'd been targeted because he was white. After 5 years, Lauren finally removed her tattoos and announced she planned to leave the white power group. In response, she was attacked, beaten, and hospitalized for a week.
We used to say that we're fighting for the freedom of the white race. However, there was nothing freeing about being trapped in that web. I had wrapped my entire identity around this movement. So the biggest question was, okay, how am I going to find myself again?
Today, after 8 years, Lauren is finally free. Both she and her mother now provide counseling and support for others who find themselves or their loved ones trapped in extremist groups. Jeanette says these days it seems everyone knows someone who has become consumed by conspiracies.
Boy, I don't think the governments have realized how epidemic it is.
And those digital predators now have a new hunting ground.
I mean, this is it.
Callum Hood, part of Imran's team in London, goes undercover in virtual reality. He recently spent 12 hours on VR Chat, a third-party Facebook app. Users wearing headsets equipped with microphones appear as avatars and interact in a virtual world.
Fake dragons, that's you. You're famous, man.
Facebook calls this living in the future. Imran describes it differently.
You have a completely lawless environment.
Okay, so you're gonna be my new girlfriend, okay?
Callum recorded these videos showing more than 100 instances of verbal abuse. From racism,
Let's get this black kid to say
to sexual assault.
Can you be my VR chat?
They occurred, on average, about every 7 minutes.
Of course, it's all from that first-person perspective. To a level of intensity that I think people find quite shocking how people behave to each other in there.
that little 12-year-old.
Imran's team reported the incidents to VR Chat and Facebook, but 2 months later he says there's been no response.
You press the emergency button and nothing happens. If you're going to build with safety at the heart of your experience, they're going to have to put in a lot of work to get this as somewhere where parents would feel safe leaving their kids, because right now, you don't want Mark Zuckerberg babysitting your kids.
In an email, the makers of VR Chat told Global News they provide options to mute or block abusive users. And moderators can also suspend or ban those who violate their code of conduct.
Meta. Our mission remains the same.
Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Facebook's parent company Meta told Global News they're rolling out new safety measures starting this month, including parental supervision tools to prevent children from unlocking adult content.
Communicate with your friends across different layers of reality.
They add that Meta employs third-party fact-checkers in 80 countries and 60 languages to remove or label misinformation on their platform.
Fewer than 1 in 10 posts with links to Russian propaganda were being labeled.
Meta also says that Imran's earlier claim that 91% of Russian state media posts were unlabeled is, quote, wildly inaccurate, saying that misinformation amounted to less than 1% of all posts about Ukraine or Russia. But within days of releasing his report, Imran says Facebook began cracking down.
So if you clicked on the link, it would actually say Russia state-controlled media.
Do you think that labeling posts in that way makes any real difference?
It's not the most effective tool that they could do. The most effective is deplatform. If someone breaks your rules again and again and again by spreading misinformation, which is against your rules, then take action against them. If you don't take action, what you're saying is the rules don't matter. There are no rules on our platform as long as we're making money.
If big tech companies won't take action on their own, Imran is taking the fight to them, holding meetings and addressing lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
Mr. Ahmed, you are recognized now for 5 minutes.
Social media companies cannot self-regulate.
And in Westminster.
We have failed on multiple levels.
It's not exactly a fair fight. The parent companies of Facebook and Google raked in a combined $375 billion last year. Imran's total annual budget is $2 million. You're taking on some of the biggest companies in the world. Do you feel a little like David going against Goliath here?
Our voice is one amongst billions.
You're racist.
There are millions of parents who are worried about the impact of social media on their children. There are millions of people who care about human rights around the world and are worried about the impact of social media on human rights, on empowering the worst actors among us. I actually think that we're the many and they are the few.
And he believes change is coming. U.S. lawmakers have proposed dozens of different bills designed to make big tech more accountable. The European Union is close to enacting the most sweeping reforms in the world, and the Canadian government promised to introduce a new digital charter this year. Positive moves, but Imran worries still too little and too slow.
The last few years have been an experiment in what if we privatize political discourse and the way that we communicate with each other, and we hand it over to a company who seeks to maximize their profits by picking out the stuff that makes us most angry and engaged. The enormous greed, the rapaciousness that underpins the way that social media companies have sought to change our societies for their economic benefit, that could destroy democracy. Without that democracy, we're in real trouble.